We are embarking on our descent. Please sit tight for the final leg of the journey. In this last segment, we'll be diving into biometric identity, AI ethics, and legal sector. Our next speaker is the recipient of the 2019 Lawyers Weekly Women in Law Award for Wellbeing Advocate of the Year. This award recognizes their passion and leadership in mental health and well-being, best practices both at Clayton Utz and the broader business community. An insurance and risk lawyer by background, they are responsible for the management of enterprise-wide risk at Clayton Utz, presenting on building the right cyber risk culture to complement your organizational culture. Please welcome Alexia Houston, Head of Insurance and Risk at Clayton Utz. Thanks, Alexia. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're well and surviving what looks like has been quite a long day for you all. I'll try to keep this interesting and fun, and we'll try to move through it pretty quickly to see if we can catch up some time. So by background, I'm assuming you can all hear me. Let me know if you can't. I'm the head of risk at Clayton Utz. By background, I am a lawyer, and my work was largely representing large corporate clients in insurance and risk litigation matters. In my role as the head of risk at Clayton Utz, that's enterprise-wide risk at the firm, which includes cyber risk, operational risks, legal and regulatory compliance, crisis management, business continuity, health and safety. And in 2020, it's largely involved managing COVID, not something that I thought would end up taking me 8 months. I also sit on our cybersecurity board, and I report to our finance, risk and audit committee of our main board with respect to all of our enterprise risks, including cyber. Together with our IT director, we lead the firm's cybersecurity strategy. We as a firm aim to be a leader in cyber risk and cybersecurity, and our current strategy that we have in place for this year and the next two really highlights that our people and our cyber risk culture is one of 4 key pillars of action. Cyber is every partner and employee's responsibility at the firm, and all of each and every single partner and employee are key to our defence. One of our key outcomes or metrics is that they know and understand their responsibilities with respect to cyber risk and cyber security. We also have a key part of our strategy, which you'll see why this is relevant and important as I start to go through some of the slides, is that it's very key to us that while we are a leader in cyber strategy and cyber risk, and that we will take our role as trusted advisor and holder of client documents very seriously, we must respond appropriately and proportionately to the risk while supporting our business needs. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how you can use well-crafted, well-documented, well-supported risk appetite statements and wording around risk appetite to really improve understanding and acceptance of risk broadly, but specifically cyber risk at all levels of the organisation. And by improving that understanding, you can really get people on your side in being a key part of your cyber risk strategy and an effective part of your cyber risk strategy, and build the cyber risk culture within your organisation that you want to do. I think it goes without saying for most of us, well, all of us, that we are more likely to do what we are told to do if we know why, and if it has been explained to us in language that we understand. We know why it's important in the context of the business, and we also know how it's linked to performance outcomes and business strategy. So that's why I think getting this right can make a real difference. So I'm assuming most people on this call will know what risk appetite is about, but just in case, I've just put up a quick definition about risk appetite. It's different to risk tolerance. So it's not the amount of risk we can take, it's the amount of risk we want to take, and it's the amount of risk we really are willing to accept that would help us to achieve our objectives. So it's to achieve business strategy, to achieve business outcomes, what risk are we willing to take? And I think that's a very powerful concept. So can we go back one? Ooh. That's right. That's okay. We're fine. So what does a good risk appetite statement look like? It's really important that it is aligned to strategy. You can't set your risk appetite without knowing what your strategic objectives are. When it's done well, it gives clear guidance from the board or your leadership team to the organisation about the amount and type of risk that the organisation should take. It can't be generic. So, well, if it's going to be good and helpful, I don't believe it can be generic. If you, for example, simply say, as an organisation, we've got a low tolerance for risk, that's really not particularly instructive. It's not potentially... It doesn't recognise that in different areas of the business, you will have different appetites for risk. It doesn't recognise that in certain areas, you will be wanting to take more risk to achieve your business outcomes. So for an example of that, you may have a very low appetite for risk when it comes to something like data breach, but you may have a medium or high appetite when it comes to innovation type risks. And so therefore, it's important that you articulate risk appetite by material types or areas of risk rather than a general statement, to ensure that people who are reading it, people in your organisation can really understand it. What we've found works well is to ensure that you've got a qualitative statement that really reflects the board or your leadership team's expectations for those material areas of risk. And it should be in language that's meaningful to everyone. So if you have certain vernacular that you use regularly in your organisation, if you have various values that you articulate a lot that are meaningful in your organisation, then use those. It should be hopefully in language that is not either tech language and not necessarily risk language either. It's just the everyday language that people in your organisation use. While you have a qualitative statement, it's really important those statements are backed up by very clear quantitative metrics or key risk indicators. So it starts to be instructive in practice about what that will mean for people in your organisation. If it then makes it easier to have a conversation with those people about what that risk statement means in reality. One of the things that I really like about a good risk appetite statement is it encourages risk management and not risk aversion. It establishes clear risk owners for your most material risks and helps to facilitate accountability, should help to facilitate accountability and ownership of risk. Really importantly, it should have upside and downside. So your metrics should not simply be about mitigating risk. They should also give you an idea of when the business is taking too little risk, for example, with respect to something such as innovation or client pursuit. If a risk moves outside the clearly expressed upper limit, then that's a really good guidance for your teams about when they need to take action, and you can build your reporting around that. However, that lower limit also means that people have very clear responsibility about in what parameters they can make decisions and can be accountable and responsible for that, and helps to shift a mindset that risk is always bad. And that's why we always talk about appropriate and proportionate response to risk. So how does risk appetite and risk management link? Often I find that the risk processes are often not linked to business outcomes. They are criticised for their lack of commerciality, and they're criticised for not being business outcome focused. They have often been externally created and presented to a board who have validated that potentially that risk matrix or that risk framework, but perhaps have not understood necessarily everything that they were talking about. And it's often in language that is very risk management based. And so it's often not well understood by everyone, and doesn't use business terminology. And that to me is a pretty big flaw with risk. If I can't explain the way I manage risk to everybody in the firm, then I'm doing it wrong. If my risk framework is so complex that it's not easily understood by every single person in the business, then I'm doing it wrong. We also know that when risk management frameworks are developed, or cyber risk management frameworks are developed simply by IT and risk, it can mean you've got very different views of risk to what the business leaders or other people do. So that's why this risk appetite really helps to link your risk management framework to business outcomes. Often we see risk assessment criteria in your matrices that don't actually reflect risk appetite or strategic objectives. And because of that, they can be not particularly helpful in terms of actually guiding strategic decision making, and don't really provide a great framework for us to assess our cyber risk performance. And it means that often you have people coming to assess risks, and you go to your risk workshops I sit down with my IT team, we look at our cyber risks all the time. And however, if you don't know what the firm's appetite and approach for risk is, then you come with your own preconceived biases and views. And there's a couple of really good examples of just how my risk appetite is very different for the firms. And when I walk into the office, I change my risk appetite hat. So I'm a big traveller, obviously not this year. I like travelling to weird and wonderful places, and scarily enough, tend to go to ones that have got quite high crime rates, pretty poor healthcare, and probably that freaked my parents out just a little bit. Now, that's my risk appetite. I'm happy to take that risk with a well-placed travel insurance policy. But when I come to assess risk for the business, I put that aside, because I know the risk appetite of the firm with respect to health and safety is very different, and that would not be within the firm's risk appetite. This year, you would have seen, I'm sure you've seen in your own organisations, where people have very differing views for COVID and have very different appetites for going out. I think we've got some people who may never come into the office for another 3 years. And yet we've got others that, if they had their way, would never have left the office whatsoever. Another example you might see is somebody, a millennial in your organisation that actually has a fairly high risk appetite for something like privacy. They'll happily post all their personal information onto Instagram, Snapchat, etc., etc. But then you will have others where it is very different. And as an organisation, we would have a very low risk tolerance for privacy risks. So when you integrate risk appetite and risk management, what I really see is that you've got a risk process that's integrated, that better supports decision making, whether that's strategic decision making, such as acquisition of a business or undertaking a new line of business, or resourcing, budgeting, helping your security teams to understand where they should be focusing their resources, where there are risks that potentially are not within appetite and really need attention. It gives you meaningful assessment of risks, and it's linked to stakeholders, it's linked to your business's performance, and therefore you can really communicate in a language that resonates with the business and your board and your senior leadership. So then, how do we use risk appetite to build cyber culture? So we've touched on a couple of things. Risk appetite really, really does help you to build that cyber culture, because firstly, it establishes accountability and responsibility. You've got risk owners for all of your key risks. You allocate them and give them decision-making authority within the upper and lower limits of risk appetite. It becomes something, cyber risk then is something they do for themselves. It's no longer a compliance process. It's no longer about always needing to seek authority. It's about devolving that responsibility and holding people accountable. through the process of developing risk appetite, you can really build engagement. Something that we've seen is that it gives people all across the business an insight into why you manage risk, about what the firm's view is on different risks, and really allows you to engage with all the risk owners about what they think your organisation's risk appetite should be in that particular area, and then to work with them on what metrics or indicators they think can really support that. Often, it makes it much easier to link it also to performance and rewards. So if you have, I've often seen in capability frameworks or job descriptions, it says something like manages cyber risk, or, uses risk management appropriately. Now, what does that mean? It's not a particularly helpful terminology. Whereas with risk appetite, you've already established up front what the organisation's risk appetite is. You can say to your managers and to everyone in your teams that you expect them to manage risk within that appetite that they helped you develop. And you've also got key metrics that you can then use to assess performance. And you're then really able to identify those people who are doing this really well, who are really engaged from a risk perspective, and they can become your cyber risk champions. And you can also then use it as a way to have discussions with people who are not doing this appropriately. As I've said, one common language understandable by everyone in the organisation. Now, I'm not an IT person, and so often I sit down with our IT people and I have no idea what they're saying. I don't understand their acronyms, and it can be a pretty weird conversation. Similarly, they often won't know what I'm talking about from a legal or risk perspective, and I might use acronyms that are not very clear to them. So the idea is that this shouldn't be something that's only intelligible by someone who's got a master's in cyber. It should be intelligible to everyone in your organisation, from the shop floor to the boardroom. One of the biggest things is I also think risk appetite gives you a really good platform to challenge behaviour that's not consistent. So we had a perfect example of this that came up the other day. Somebody, very senior person in the business, said, "Hey, IT team, can you please do this? I would like everybody in my team to have access to X, Y, and Z for a particular..." And it enabled that particular person in the IT security team to say, "Look, if I did that, it means that we will be outside our risk appetite with respect to a particular area. It is, our risk appetite is approved by the board. And if I go outside of that, it's going to be escalated to them." Now, I'm happy to do that if you would like, if you consider this to be critical for the business, but you'll need to be able to explain to them why you're willing to put the firm outside of our risk appetite. It also, and they immediately said, "Oh no, don't worry about it. I'll make other we can work around the current. We can work with the current controls." It also enables you to, where you've got an example where perhaps a risk has been mitigated too much. So somebody's gone for an elimination strategy or a zero tolerance strategy, when in fact there might be, you're willing to accept a little bit of risk in a particular area so that you can meet business needs. So this would also enable you to say, "Hey, have you thought about this control in the context of the risk appetite? It doesn't look like this is what we're aiming to do." And with that type of behaviour, you can actually improve your cyber risk reputation with leadership and people in the business, because they will see that you are not all about saying no. You are not all about putting in controls that might impede business if it's not necessary. You have a balanced view of risk. You consider it always in terms of the appetite that's been set by the board, and therefore, you can show that your approach to cyber risk is commercial, it's pragmatic, it's business oriented, it's aligned to helping the firm or your organisation achieve their business outcomes, their performance outcomes, and their strategic objectives. So on that basis, I think I will conclude there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Alexia. I really thoroughly enjoyed your session. And again, apologies, we are running slightly behind time, so please hang in there. And any questions for Alexia, she will be available to answer those separately. Just drop them in the Q&A section. Thank you so much, Alexia.
Thanks. Have a great rest of the day.